Let's turn now to the presidential race. And we've got a lot of new polling that's come in since that presidential debate. Let's put this up there on the screen. Nate Silver's general analysis. He says, today's update after an Atlas Intel poll cut against what was otherwise strong day of polling for Harris. It is a highly rated poll, resist the temptation to unskew. Still enough good data for her that the race is now officially in toss-up range. So he hasn't given us a latest update. The last one I saw for his projection was 60-40. So toss-up range, I'm assuming he's moving more to like 55-45 and whatever his latest
he said he considers
would be.
Anything over a 40% chance to be toss-up.
I could see that.
So 60-40 he still considers to be toss-up. But yeah, we haven't had an update since then to see if it's moved even more towards her.
I think that's actually quite reasonable, especially considering, you know, again, if you had a 40% chance of something crazy happen, you would take it pretty seriously.
Oh yeah.
You would be like, okay, I think that's quite a very reasonable result. Let's put this next one up here. This arguably was the most important, and it was release of this Iowa Seltzer poll. This is one of the polls that arguably drove Joe Biden out of the race because it showed him so far down in the state of Iowa, which then translated to Michigan and to nearby states. So this new Des Moines Register poll actually shows Trump leading Harris by only 4 points amongst likely Iowa voters, quote, a far slimmer margin than the 18-point lead that Donald Trump enjoyed over Democratic Joe Biden in the late spring. So in this poll, they have him at 47%, Kamala at 43%. RFK Jr. actually still getting some 6% here because it appears he's been unable to get himself off of the ballot. Now, obviously, we don't know how that is going to split. And if you were to count all of those people in the Trump category, then certainly he'd be leading by quite a bit more. At the same time, they did this poll after he dropped out of the race, so maybe some people are just ride or die and they want to vote for him anyways. He's changed his tune in some cases. He said, and sometimes he said, if you live in an uncompetitive state, you should vote for me. If you live in a battleground state, you shouldn't vote for me. But regardless, a 4% lead in the state of Iowa, very far from the 18-point lead he had over Biden, and implies a tie specifically amongst the demographic that he would need the most in places like Michigan and Wisconsin and surrounding areas of the Midwest, which is why it was so important that Biden poll last time around.
So in comparison, in 2020, Trump won Iowa. Everyone expects him to win Iowa.
He's gonna win Iowa.
Let's be clear about that. This poll isn't about like, oh my God, Kamala Harris has a chance in Iowa. It's because this poll is so highly rated, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, that people really pay attention to it and why it was such a big deal that Joe Biden was losing the state by 18 points. And it's the state that Trump won last time by 8 points. So the fact that in this poll, Kamala has halved Trump's margin from his, victory margin in Iowa last time around is a really, eyebrow-raising result. And as you said, you kind of extrapolate out from that, like, okay, then how is he doing in these other states that are nearby to Iowa? But the reason why, again, this poll is so taken so seriously in terms of Washington opinion is because Ann Selzer, the pollster, has such a unique track record of being incredibly accurate in the state of Iowa. You guys might recall back in the 2020 primary when she polled the Iowa caucuses, it was a bad result for Pete Buttigieg going into the Iowa caucuses, and his team, led by Liz Smith, was able to basically pull the whole poll because they were so worried about what that poll would indicate for them and what sort of narrative could come out of that, because people do take it so seriously. So that's why, even though this is a poll of a state that no one expects Kamala Harris to win, why it's such a big deal post-debate that she's within striking distance here, only 4 points of Donald Trump, is because it has such a track record of being incredibly accurate. So really interesting there. Yeah, RFK Jr. is going to stay on the ballot in Iowa. He's going to be on the ballot in a number of states because he pulled out so late that it was actually too late to get him off the ballot in quite a number of places. In North Carolina, he was successfully able to get his name off of the ballot, but it actually, caused quite a lot of problems for that state because they had already printed the ballots. They were ready to go out and start their mail-in balloting process. They're one of the earliest states in the country with all of that. So they had to delay that by several weeks and incur a significant expense in order to get his name off the ballot. Other states said, no, sorry, too late. You're here. You're going to be on the ballot. And Iowa is one of those. So, we'll see whether that takes any votes from Trump at the end of the day in a state like Iowa or others where he remains on the ballot. But it is expected that he will be there in November.
So Iowa, that was a big one. Let's go to the next one because this is actually useful just to look at a lot of the post-debate polling landscape. And so we have here, quote, 7 A and B rated polls post-debate. So ABC News and Ipsos, this had Harris up by +6. That was actually very significant because that was Harris +6 amongst likely voters. Reuters, Ipsos, so they had Harris up by 5. Yahoo News, YouGov, they had Harris up by 4. You had others, Harris 4. Times YouGov, Harris 4. Data for Progress, Harris 4. And it was Atlas Intel, that's the one that Nate referenced a little bit earlier, that showed Trump up by 3. So this was in the national election. Obviously, this is a little bit over the map when you include the Atlas one, but outliers certainly are ones that exist. And so it's actually better that they publish it so we can just consider and look at all of that. It's two things are possible. Atlas Intel is correct, everybody else is wrong. Or if you just kind of look at the overall average of this, you would say there's a relative Harris bump here. Now remember, she does need to win the popular vote by 2 to 3 points in order to maintain an electoral college victory. So you shouldn't be celebrating too much. You should also remember that Joe Biden was beating Trump by even larger margins in 2020 and 2016. So I guess really what I would say is I think that Nate's analysis of we're back to toss-up just seems the probably best way to look at the analysis in general. There's been too much public polling now and a lot of ways that people have reacted since that show that Donald Trump did not do well enough in the debate to consider even doing it again. In general, I think that's a major missed opportunity, as I said, because why would you take somebody who doesn't do well in scripted interviews or in scripted situations and just give her, less and just give her the least amount of time, the best possible performance for her to be able to run on when she can continue challenging, saying, hey, I want to do another debate.
Yeah.
Now, she's not, I think, forcing it too hard. She's probably pretty happy to be where she is. But for Trump to be the first one to come out and just be like, there will be no third debate, I still think it remains a problem for him. And because 67 million people watched it on television, probably 80 to 90 million consumed the content overall. That's half of all registered voters in this country. And, look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're just so polarized, people don't vote on that stuff anymore. But there's not a lot of evidence of that, considering the 2022 Roe versus Wade voting, where you had a lot of people who previously voted Republican who ended up voting Democrat or who had not previously voted. Same with Stop the Steal. There's been tons of major margins that do not fall within the in polarization metrics. So, for example, Josh Shapiro beating Doug Mastriano by such big numbers. John Fetterman winning by a decent margin there. Carrie Lake getting destroyed right now in a lot of the polling that we see in Arizona. So you just can't tell me that there aren't at least some swing voters that are up for grabs.
I mean, even if it's just marginal, we're talking about a race that's going to be won on the margins.
Yes.
So, no, I think it's a major strategic error for Trump to be like, no, absolutely not, no more debates, which is why I still hold open a possibility he may yet change his mind, especially if the polling becomes, more consistently in the direction of Kamala Harris +4, 5, 6. And, what was noteworthy about the, in fact, can we put back up the graphic we just had, A3 up on the screen? Because it has not just the actual poll results, but then you can see them plotted on a chart. I thought this was kind of useful. You can see where the debate is, and then all of the polls post-debate, save for the one, which again, we shouldn't discard. It's important to keep track of that one. But all of the other ones are really clustered in a similar place. Whereas prior to the debate, first of all, the overall sort of like average of the polls was lower, and also they were scattered over a wider plot. So I thought that was interesting to see the post-debate result there. The other question with debates is, it's not uncommon that there's a bump coming out of a debate. It's also not uncommon that that bump goes away. 2 more points to make before we get to some of the other polling. Number one, of all the various electoral prediction models that exist now, Nate Silver's is the most pessimistic for Kamala Harris. The other ones all project her to, have, again, it's in the toss-up range, but a 56 or 60% chance of winning the Electoral College. Nate is a little bit of an outlier in terms of being pessimistic. Now, he's also the person who sort of invented this whole genre. So, I think it's worth taking seriously what his model is saying, and he was closer to being accurate in 2016 than a lot of other individuals too, but just wanted to point that out. And then Another thing that stuck with me that I saw someone point out online is, on the one hand, I think there's an appropriate skepticism of the polls, of a potential miss, honestly, in either direction. One thing that is different, though, because sometimes I start getting these like 2016 vibes, which I think probably everybody has had it at different moments. But one thing that's genuinely different between Kamala Harris's profile and Hillary Clinton's profile is, even though Hillary was up more in the polls at this point, she always had a very negative favorability rating. She was like underwater by like 16 points on the favorability rating. Kamala is like even. And to me, that makes the scenario very different. That was always sort of looming over the potential Hillary Clinton results, is basically like, yeah, the polls say she's up, but man, people really don't like this lady. And that is not the same dynamic here with Kamala Harris, which I think could end up being significant.
Certainly possible. It's just there's so many confounding variables that I really just think it's better to just like present all the info and be like, you can make up what you want from it. I guess I could see it in all different ones. I could actually see a major Democratic miss that's unable to capture the same way that happened in 2022. That's the most recent polling miss that we have. They were off by 5 or so points. A lot of that was Roe versus Wade. There's been so much dynamic change in the electorate in just the last 90 days, last 100 days or whatever for Kamala. That's a pretty, and that's the other thing. Is that a problem for polling? I almost would forgive them. It's such a crazy scenario. It's difficult to poll only for 100 days and try to get, to peg like who exactly is voting or not and not be able to capture that. And I could do it the other way, which is that, look, it's very possible that Trump's strength is understated with all of this. You've got the whole likely voter problem of, you've got people who are traditional Democrats who like answering polls. This was a big 2020 thesis, so that we could have replicated that. Maybe we've been unable to solve. There's some other interesting stuff that points more in the Harris direction. Let's put this up there, for example. This is from the Financial Times. This is significant just because it does show some divergence on the economy. FT finds that Kamala, quote, better represents the interests of middle class. It says 49 to 36 for Kamala Harris. Small business. See, that's the one where I'm just like, really? Is that really true? 48 to 37.
Her passion is small business. She said it.
Yeah, but small business owners are the most conservative people by demographic.
But you have to keep in mind, though, this is a poll of everyone.
Yeah, right.
So you're asking everyone, who do you think will be better for small business? I think if you just ask small business owners, you would maybe get a different result, because you're right, they do tend to be conservative. But this is like you're asking the entire electorate, who do you think will be better for these groups?
Good point.
So, yeah.
Okay, so small business was, 48 to 37. Union members says 45 to 35. Blue collar, 43 to 36. I will say that on Trump, I don't necessarily want to be where he is. They have him at 64 to 20 for large corporations on who they think he would be better for, and 67 to 19 on wealthy people. So that was the individual ones. The overall economy, I think that's kind of interesting. The respondents also, of those who were more likely to trust Harris than Trump on the economy, actually watched the entire debate. So that was fascinating. I would say overall this is very, very favorable for her. So, take it for however you want. I'd never seen her beat him on the economy, this badly before. So
yeah.
I would more put it as an outlier. But look, again, it could be one that you could look to and say, if Trump does lose the election on the margins by a couple of points and it's in these swing states, it very much could be because of issues like this, where if you feel, the thing is, the Republicans lost 2022, even though they had a huge margin on the economy.
Yeah, that's right.
So that shows you that Roe and Stop the Steal can actually overcome, even when you're winning on the overall economy.
Yeah.
Well, if you're just tied on the economy, that's bad enough.
Yeah.
If you're tied here and you've got this big Roe benefit there, I could see that being a big problem for them. So again, I have no idea what's going to happen. I still think Trump could very easily win, but I would say that there's certainly danger signs for him. And in such a close race, you should just always be doing your best in order to try and go across the finish line. You were not the underdog, throughout this entire thing. Now you're kind of putting yourself in a category where, look, a month from now we could say, hey, things are not looking that good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if she can even get in the ballpark with him on the economy, it's
that's what I mean.
Pretty devastating for him. And Republicans historically have typically, there's an instinct among the American public to just assume Republicans are going to be better on the economy. And then Donald Trump, that was always his core strength because, you know, he's the businessman, et cetera, et cetera. And you always point out Saagar back in 2020, and when we were looking at the polls and saying to the Trump people, like, you guys are toast, you don't have a chance, that was the number they would always point to. Yes, but he has this significant edge on the economy. And look, it wasn't enough. He still lost, but that was indicative of there is more strength for him here than we thought. So when I see these numbers, and yeah, it could be an outlier, we should also point out Financial Times we covered before. They have been asking, you know, who's better on the economy, and their previous poll had Harris basically tied with Trump. This poll has her up by a little bit. So they've been seeing this trend for Kamala Harris as not consistent with some of the other polls that we've seen where he continues to have a clear edge over her on the economy. But like I said, if she can even narrow that gap and get within striking distance, that's more devastating for him, honestly, than almost any of the other polling data that I've seen, because that's their bet. And she was able in that debate, because she moved the conversation where she wanted it to go. He got so distracted and enraged, et cetera, that he wasn't able to consistently land his points that him and his campaign have wanting him to be making on the economy. And, you know, if he decides he's genuinely not going to do another debate, he's, outside of paid communications, not going to have a lot of opportunities to continue to land those points.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.